Welcome back to another weekly roundup of cloud gaming news brought to you by yours truly. Remember, if you want to stay up to date with all the latest in cloud gaming, be sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications so you don't miss the next video, and of course, if you enjoy the content, give the video a like, helps the channel out a lot. But for now, let's get into this week's cloud gaming news. Let's start things off with some Stadia news, and let's highlight the new titles added to Stadia, which have now brought the library up to 100 games. Now, Stadia were previously targeting 120 titles by the end of 2020, but that was, before 2020'd all over the place. So reaching 100 titles is still pretty good. First up, in the first drop of Ubisoft titles, we got Far Cry 5 and Far Cry New Dawn, both available with standard and ultimate or deluxe versions, and are also currently on a pro sale, making the base version of Far Cry 5 just $11.59 instead of $39.99, and New Dawn is $13.19, strange price, instead of $39.99. We also have Little Big Workshop, a Satisfactory style factory tycoon game where you'll set up a production line, manage workers, produce goods to sell, and then reinvest the profits back into the factory to keep it growing. And finally, we have Ari and the Secret of Seasons, which is an action adventure game where you'll take control of the seasons and use them to solve puzzles and defeat enemies. Are you interested in picking up any of these titles? Let me know in those comments down below. Next, it's that time again. We have another APK breakdown of the most recent version of Stadia from the guys over at 9to5 Google. Instead of deep diving into this, I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested in finding out some of the things they've uncovered in the most recent Stadia 2.42 APK, which includes a new method of sharing screenshots, third-party controller setup, more information on in-game messaging, and a potential change to the Stadia Pro sign-up process, which may mean you no longer need to enter your card details when signing up, because if you're anything like me, you've accidentally overrun every free trial you've ever started. And with that out of the way, let's get into our final big piece of Stadia news this week. A long-awaited feature started to roll out this week, and that is family sharing. Family sharing on Stadia allows users to set up a Google Family group and invite other users to the group using their email address, regardless of if it's people within your own house or a friend on the other side of the world. In order to create a Google Family group, a payment method needs to be assigned to the group, but this doesn't mean that other people in the group can just start making purchases left and right. A game purchase request is always sent to the primary user to approve or deny. Just don't get drunk on that power. Once that group is set up, the primary user can then choose to share either their entire Stadia library or just specific titles if you plan to share them with the kids and don't want them to poop their pants at something like Little Nightmares. That game is truly horrifying. Now, with the rollout of family sharing, we have some good news and some bad news. Good news is, if the primary user is a Stadia Pro subscriber, they can share their entire backlog of Stadia Pro titles and all future Stadia Pro titles with other members of the group, without those members of the group also needing to be signed up for Stadia Pro. So it's kind of like when a group of people piggyback off of one poor bastard's Netflix subscription. Obviously, if that primary user cancels Stadia Pro, both they and the group will then lose access to that Stadia Pro content. Which leads us to the bad news. In this current implementation of family sharing, it is not possible for two users within the family group to play the same game at the same time. So more than one user can play games at a time, it's just they can't be playing the same game. Which to me is just such a missed opportunity. If you look at the Stadia library, it's almost geared towards these party-style co-op couch games, so it's weird to have this one caveat introduced into their new feature. The exception to this weird rule is if both users have separately purchased the same title, or both users are active Stadia Pro subscribers and they want to play a Stadia Pro game, then in both of those situations, they would be able to play that game together at the same time. I don't know, to me, it feels like a weird restriction to throw in with a feature that I know a lot of people have been waiting for since launch. So what do you think of this? Are you going to be setting up a sharing group? Let me know in those comments down below. Next, in a weird one, we have a patent filed by Amazon for a technology that could detect if you're an arsehole. I'm actually not joking. The patent filed refers to a method of identifying toxic players and grouping those players together in online matches so that their toxicity doesn't spill over into a game's general player base. In comparison, this would be similar to the cheat detection mechanism Fall Guys implemented that forces hackers to play together off on the side on something they call Cheater Island. If implemented, it is possible we could see this feature used in multiplayer titles on Amazon Luna in the future. The patent explains briefly the logic behind the matchmaking idea. stating, "Players' enjoyment may depend heavily based on behaviors of other users with which they are paired, such as the proclivity of other players to use profanity, or engage in other undesirable behaviors. Players who engage in such behaviors may be labeled as toxic by other players. One mechanism for dealing with such players is to isolate all toxic players into a separate players pool, such that one toxic player is only paired with other toxic players." At this point, there's no further information on how this would work, or even what would be considered a, quote, undesirable behavior. Amazon themselves would have to draw that moral line in the sand between friendly fire and some good old-fashioned teabagging.
Red carriers spotted.
Next, it's a new week, which of course means a new selection of games added to the GeForce Now library, which I'll throw up on screen here. After a smaller selection last week, GeForce Now are coming back strong with 10 games added to the service this week. Firstly, after growing demand, this week they've added Among Us to the selection. Pretty sus if you ask me, but what do I know? I was in medbay doing a scan. I'm for murder. As usual, we also have the Epic Vault free game with Dungeons free, which is available to claim from the Epic Store until November 12th. And as well as the recent day-and-date releases for a lot of titles, it looks like they're actually getting extra prepared, adding in a couple of betas this week. First up, we have the closed beta for Naraka Blade Point, which currently features an online solo mode called Endless Trial, which pits you against 15 other players using Chinese-inspired warriors, and has some pretty interesting moving mechanics, like climbing, hanging, wall running, and the ability to grapple hook onto absolutely everything. And finally, we have Worms Rumble, which is a 32-player side-on shooter, which is currently in open beta and available to try this weekend. And finally, in some quick Shadow news, we have 2 features which are currently in beta, which will make their way to the Shadow official app next week. First up, we have Dynamic Bandwidth. As the name suggests, this constantly monitors your network and makes on-the-fly adjustments to keep your Shadow session running as smooth as possible without stutters, input delay, or pixelation. And finally, for those who wanted to make a AAA gaming setup using just Shadow and their iPad, Apple kind of got in the way of that by forcing a cursor lock in FPS titles. And I don't know about you, but I'm partial to, being able to look around when I play games. Well, this has now been fixed with the release of iOS 14.2 and is currently in the test flight version of Shadow from the App Store if you wanted to give it a try right now, but this will be rolled out to the official version of the iOS app next week. But that's it from me, so of course, if you enjoyed the video, you found it somewhat helpful, a like rating would be appreciated. If you haven't already, remember to subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications so you don't miss the next video. Hope everyone's staying safe out there, and as always, I shall see you in the next one.